Hello everyone, let me set the context for the video. If you are someone who wants to learn web development and every video that you watch on the internet leaves you more confused than before, this video is for you. I've watched countless web development tutorials on the internet, and every single video that I've watched, they don't help beginners at all. I mean, they end up doing the opposite. They leave you overwhelmed, lost, and clueless. What usually happens is these internet mentors start throwing some technical jargon at beginners. They say things like you should start from learning how the web works internally, how DNS works, how networking works. I mean, how do you expect someone who's from a non-technical background who wants to learn development um, would start learning how a client works, how server works, how these things communicate? How can they learn these on day one? This approach just doesn't work. Everyone's not smart. At least I was not when I started initially. So we are going to do something different. I'm going to give you a full stack roadmap that you can actually start implementing today. We are going to keep it very high level, but it's going to be very action based. So the goal is not to make you feel smart. The goal is to just take a simple idea and start executing today. We are not going to overthink tools. We are not going to deep dive into theory. We are just going to take a simple idea and start the execution phase. The execution phase is very important because that's what actually teaches you instead of watching tutorials. So once you start executing, everything else, DNS, networking, the servers, clients, everything will start to make sense eventually. That's the whole point, and that's why I've named this roadmap 0 to 1. 0 means confusion and 1 means execution. So let's get started. So before we talk about what to learn first, what to learn, we need to clear one thing. We need to have a very high level mental model of how the internet works. We're not going to deep dive. We are not going to, I'm not going to throw some technical jargons at you, just enough to move forward. Think of it like this. When you open a website on your browser, anything that you see there, it can be text, images, layout, anything. That's called the front end of the website. Front end is just the part of your website that you can see and interact with. So the front end doesn't work alone. It needs a backend to process requests and make decisions. Backend is just the code that runs somewhere else and whose job is to process requests and make decisions, nothing else. So what usually happens is you go to the browser sends the request to your front end of your website, front end sends the request to the backend, and backend sends the request to the database. That's how the data flows basically. Data is stored in the database, not the backend itself. The backend only job is to make decisions and talks to the backend, talks to the database, I'm sorry. Now front-end is not supposed to talk to the database directly. With certain tools, we can talk to the database through the front-end, but it's not ideal because of the security issues. You don't need to understand why. Just understand this. The front-end is not supposed to talk to the database directly. Now, let's move on. Now, the next question comes, should you learn front-end or back-end? And there's always been a debate about should you start from front end or back end, but I strongly believe that you should start from front end because the reason is very simple. It's actually simple when you're starting, and more importantly, you can see what you actually build. When you start to build something on the front end, it shows up on the screen. The buttons, text, layout is all visible, and that visibility alone is very important. It matters a lot in the beginning. Psychologically, it will boost your confidence and keeps you motivated. Backend, on the other hand, that mostly runs in terminal, and let's be honest, for a beginner, that's boring as hell. So let's start from the front end. The first thing that you will learn on the front end is HTML. HTML is not a programming; it's just a markup language that will help you structure your website. We're not going to deep dive in what to learn in HTML. You can just go and Google it. And along with that, you should learn CSS. CSS alone, it doesn't work. It depends on HTML. There are dozens of good tutorials that you can actually follow. Let's go and search it up. And this is the video I think I've watched in which this is a great resource for HTML CSS. spend some time here, spend a week or two learning HTML and CSS. Once you are comfortable in HTML and CSS, start building some projects. Go to the Google and search for login page, and start cloning any of these. That's how I started, and that's how you can. After that, start building a Google clone. It's very simple. Actually, when you go to google.com, you'll learn how the flex works, um, vertically and horizontally both. Start cloning anything that you actually see. The YouTube clone will, the resource that I gave you, I think he creates a YouTube. Yes, he definitely creates a YouTube clone. So start building anything that you use on the daily basis. Now, once you're comfortable in HTML, CSS, now it's time to move on to JavaScript. And to be honest, JavaScript is the core of the whole entire roadmap. If you are weak here, you will spend most of your time fixing that later. So if you rush it or try to skip it, you'll struggle a lot, and there's no point to keep going. There's no point to go forward. These are some topics that you absolutely need to master. There's variables, data types, scopes, conditions, loops, arrays, array methods, objects, functions. This is very important. I mean, you should know at least some of very important methods of arrays, objects, function, how the CRUD works. What's a CRUD? CRUD basically means create, update, read, and delete. And then after that, you'll learn about what the asynchronous programming is, what our promise is, very important. Learn about callbacks, learn about how the async works, async functions work, like set timeout. Um, there are some others. Learn about how the spread works, how destructuring works. After that, learn about how the fetch works. Fetch is very important because this will create a foundation of how your backend journey will look like. And after that, learn about local storage. It's like a mini database that will run in the browser, that will store your data in the browser. So spend most of your time learning JavaScript, because if you're weak here, there's no point to move ahead, because this is the foundation. Everything that you see here is built on top of the JavaScript. Let's move forward. The next thing is DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model, and it's not a different programming language. It's just a combination of how the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript will work together. The DOM is responsible for your website to interact with users. Basically, this is where your button clicks, input changes, and basic logic start to make sense. When you click on a button and something happens, that's the DOM in action. JavaScript talks to the DOM to change HTML, CSS dynamically. You should spend some time here. I have already attached few projects that you can actually build, and this is the part where your logic building will start. So don't miss out on this. Don't cut the slack here. These are very simple and straightforward projects, and these will help you how to actually think like a programmer. Tic-tac-toe is very important. Notes app, quiz app, image sliders, to-do list is very important. To-do list is something that you can actually build and always scale up. You can add categories, you can add search to it, you can add normal CRUD. You can, after you build these projects, I'll urge you to go back to the JavaScript and start learning about APIs. I've already told you here to learn fetch very good, because it will help you set the foundation of the backend. But you should start learning what the API is, how the fetch works, but understand how APIs work and how you can integrate them in your existing DOM projects. You can build things like random text generator, random image generator. These are the data that will not be hard coded, that will not be written by you, but will come from some external website. And once you have built some few projects using external APIs, DOM, you'll start to notice something. Your code will get messy, and it will be very hard to scale, hard to manage, and everything will be written in one file. Could be written in different files, but most probably it will be written in one file, and that's where React comes into play. React is nothing else. It's just a library to help you organize your UI. The code that you have written in DOM, React will help you to start to organize it and manage it in the very small and reusable chunks of code. So there's a concept called components, which basically means instead of hard coding different cards which you have already built in DOM, you can actually reuse them. You can reuse your piece of code just like normal function in the JavaScript. You need to learn React very seriously. I mean, there are other options. There's Vue.js, there's AngularJS, but we are going to go with React, not because it's the best, because it has the most demand in the market. These are some topics that I could think of, and this is something that you actually need to master. This is where everything changes. If you learn these, you are already a very decent front-end developer. Try to add some more things to it. Try to learn how Tailwind CSS works and how to integrate it with React, and start building some other projects. Start watching YouTube tutorials. Start building something of your own. Try to convert your DOM projects into your React apps, and try to divide it into very small and reusable components. Try to learn what the shared CN is. Once you are comfortable in, once you feel like you are comfortable in React, start building projects. These are the projects that I recommend, and I actually urge you to build these, because it will help you boost your confidence and will help you level up. These are pretty simple and very straightforward. Weather app, if you know how the React works, sorry, if you know how the APIs work, this will be pretty straightforward. Then make a blog app, start integrating local storage in this, then make a portfolio for yourself and just mention all the projects that you have built. Search for online portfolios and try to clone them. Build an e-commerce platform that's which is just the front end of any website. You can just create the clones of the website. If you have built Airbnb, if you know what the Airbnb is, you'll know how good its UI is. So try to clone it. If you can't clone it, there's a tutorial there's this tutorial that you can actually. Now let's move to the backend. We have covered a very solid foundation of front end, and now it's time to understand what happens behind the scenes. So backend is extremely important, and honestly, it's not as scary as people make it sound. So before writing any code, you should learn these topics, understand what is backend, why we need it. I mean, what the client is, what the server is, things backend can do and frontend cannot. And at a high level, the backend just handles logic, security, authentication, and data things that should never be live on the front end. For backend, we'll stick to JavaScript, and we'll start with Node.js and Express.js. Basically, Node.js lets JavaScript run on the server, and Express.js is a framework built on top of Node that makes backend development much easier. I strongly recommend starting directly with Express.js, because raw Node can feel overwhelming at the beginning. So we'll keeping things very practical and high level. So before jumping in, make sure you are comfortable with JavaScript, because I've already told you that's the foundation of the whole thing. You should be comfortable with async programming. You should know what the npm is and how to install packages through npm. Learn about CommonJS versus ES module, what it is, what are the benefits of each. So once everything above is clear, once the basics are clear, what the backend is, let's start to write some code of Express.js. Focus on these topics and learn the implementation of these, what the HTTP server is, how to start a server in Express.js, what the port is, what are middlewares, what is REST API and how the REST principles work. Learn about route params, query params, status codes, parsing, request body, validation. Try to do it manually. Later you can just use a library called Zod. Learn about returning JSON, which you'll automatically learn when you know how to make a REST API. After that, learn about MVC pattern. It's a very important. It is not something you can't live without, but it's something that that is very similar to backend of other languages. For example, Laravel uses MVC pattern, and there are some other frameworks that also use MVC patterns. So learn about what the MVC pattern is and how the code that you have already written will fit into MVC pattern. Once you are comfortable, try to build some decent projects. try to do user CRUD operations, try to build an e-commerce. Just do the CRUD operations, which will be stored in the JavaScript object on the server. You don't need to connect a database. You don't need to store these in database. Just try to do it locally. And now it's time to connect your backend to a database. You can start with MongoDB or Postgres. Ideally, learn both, understand what MongoDB is, what Postgres is, what's the difference between both, and when to use which one. And after the database, try to learn about user authentication and authorization. I should have mentioned it. Learn about authentication versus authorization. These are critical concepts for the real world application. After that, switch to build some projects. For projects, I highly recommend make a full end-to-end user authentication and authorization system. Build an e-commerce APIs, store APIs, try to build a real estate platform, build an API which is similar to LinkedIn. Anything that you see and use on the daily basis, try to clone it, try to rebuild and understand what's happening behind the scene. At this point, you are no longer guessing. You understand what the front end is, what the back end is, and how they work together. So I would say you are officially a decent full stack developer. Now let's talk about databases. By this point, you probably have already touched a database while working on the back end. Now it's time to go slow down and go a bit deeper. For basics, first understand the basics, what the database is, why we need it, what tables are. Then move to SQL basics, learn about it, nothing advanced, just the fundamentals. After that, focus on concepts like what the models are, what are relationships, how relationships work, and most importantly, joins. Joins are critical, and this is the one topic you should not skip. If you understand joins, databases will start making sense. Next, learn how to connect your backend to a database without using any ORM. Just try to build projects using grok queries. This will help you understand what actually happens under the hood. Once that's clear, try to build some projects. The projects that you build using local objects, try to rebuild it or try to convert it into real data. Try to use real data in your projects, and the approach should be very simple. Anything that you learn, any tool that you learn, try to integrate it with your existing apps. That's a very powerful way to understand and learn anything. Once that's clear, then learn what the ORM is. ORM stands for object relational mapping. Understand what the ORM is, how we use it, when we use it, and how it connects with Node.js. Learn the basics of ORM, what actually these are. Learn how to build models and queries in ORM and especially migrations, what they are, how they work. At this stage, I recommend you learning. You can either learn Prisma or you can learn Sequelize. Both actually works very well. And now comes a very important part, the projects. Take the projects you have already built before, the user authentication and authorization with the CRUD, the e-commerce store, the real estate platform, and the LinkedIn platform, and try to scale it, try to extend it with your new models and relationships, and try to add some ORMs to it, try to add some real data, convert your old projects to your new projects using new tools that you're learning, clone them again, improve them. This way you'll actually see what you did wrong before and what you're doing better now. This is one of the best ways to learn because you grow by fixing your own mistakes. That's how it is. Now comes one of the most important parts of becoming a real developer, the maintaining code, version control, and deploying your projects. This part can feel overwhelming at first, but trust me, this is what actually makes you stand out. First, start with learning Git and GitHub. Understand what Git is, what the GitHub is, how they are different, and why we actually need it. You don't need to master everything at once. Just learn the basics and learn how to use it, and try to deploy all of your projects on GitHub. Just learn the basics that you'll actually use. There are plenty of good resources out there, and we'll probably cover this in a separate video, but for now, just try to deploy all of your projects and host all of your projects on GitHub. Next comes the basics of terminals. And I know this, it might feel scary at first, it might feel confusing, but this skill pays off massively in the long run. Along with that, try to start learning Linux and Ubuntu. This becomes extremely important when you start working with servers. Once you learn things like what VPS is, which we'll be covering next, how access computers, how to access another computing using your terminal. Anything that you'll be doing from now on will be mostly on the terminal. So that's why you need to absolutely master, not master, but you need to know the basics and know how the terminals work. Linux knowledge becomes very important and valuable. For front-end projects, deploy it on Vercel. Understand Vercel. Vercel is very straightforward. You just need to connect to your GitHub and deploy your project directly. Then learn what the domains are, what the DNS is, how the DNS works, and how to connect your domain to a Vercel hosted website. For backend projects, learn what the VPS is and how it works. Learn about how the EC2 works, AWS EC2, and AWS itself is a very heavy word which can make you stand out as a one-stack developer, and how to deploy your Node.js backend on it. You won't feel comfortable at first, but that's absolutely normal. So once you get a bit confident, move to advanced but practical concepts. Learn about reverse proxy, why we need it. It's very important and it's non-negotiable. Learn about how the PM2 works. PM2 is pretty straightforward, and what the certbot does and why we need it. And finally, connect your front end and back end all together and make your app live. That's the complete roadmap of from going from absolute zero to deploying a real application on the internet that anyone can actually have access and give you credit for. So if you have any question, feel free to ask in the comments, and I'll try to answer them all. There were some other and important topics that we didn't cover, and that's intentional. That's the next level. That's where we'll go from 1 to 10 and focus on standing out as a developer. So the roadmap here is pretty straightforward and simple. It's practical, anybody can follow it, whether you're from a technical background or not. And I hope this actually helps, and it will help you start your journey from today. Thank you.